Sometimes you're reading or listening to an argument and you come across the word if. If is a signal, a sign, a marker, an indicator that there is a hypothetical premise, that you're being offered a condition. Conditional reasoning gets slightly more complicated by modifications on the concept of if. If, only if and only if are three different ways to discuss a conditional, and whether you're using one or the other changes the entire meaning of the argument. But let's set that aside. We're going to focus on the basic one, the one that goes if ... then ... where the dots are your statements, sentences that are either true or false. Here, in this statement, the condition is the antecedent. Were you to satisfy whatever the antecedent is, then you necessarily get the consequent. For example, if it's raining, then you should take an umbrella. To make it true that you should take an umbrella, all we need is that it's raining. Then we can deduce that you should take an umbrella from the fact that it's raining, coupled with a ton of other assumptions. You might have other reasons to take an umbrella. Even if it's not raining, it's possible that you should take an umbrella. So don't work backwards. When we're dealing with conditionals, especially a simple one that has the form of if ... then ... you can get the consequent by satisfying the antecedent. In fact, that's one way to ensure the consequent, is by satisfying the antecedent. Here, the antecedent is what follows the word if, and the consequent is what follows the word then. Modus ponens. It's Latin for the mode of putting, and it looks like this. This is a logical form of a valid deductive argument. The first premise says if P, then Q. That's a conditional statement. The P is an antecedent, which is the hypothetical that if you were to have, leads you necessarily to the consequent, which in this case is Q. Premise 2 is P, so we're getting the second premise as putting what we need to get the conclusion, and then the conclusion is the consequent, is Q. So P and Q are just variables that represent any statement. Remember, a statement is a sentence that can be true or false. So let P represent anything you want and let Q represent anything you want. So long as you use the same information for P throughout the entire argument, and you use the same information for Q entire argument as well, then you will have a logical argument with a valid conclusion no matter what your P is and no matter what your Q is. The conditional statement is a part of a modus ponens. And when you put the antecedent from that conditional statement, meaning you satisfy whatever the antecedent is, then by the rules of reasoning conditionally, you have guaranteed the consequent. In other words, by satisfying the antecedent of the conditional statement from premise 1, by satisfying it by adding it as premise 2, you necessarily are guaranteed the consequent of the conditional from premise 1 as your conclusion. Let's turn these conditional statements into a modus ponens. So premise 1, if you want to do well in school, then you should go to class. Premise 2, you want to do well in school. The conclusion is necessarily that you should go to class. Second argument, premise 1, if you earn an A on the final, then you will earn an A on the class. Premise 2, you did earn an A on the final. The conclusion is necessarily that you earn an A in the class. Let's try a third and last one. Another modus ponens. Premise 1, if it is raining, then you should take an umbrella. Premise 2, it is raining. The conclusion is necessarily that you should take an umbrella. Premise 1 and premise 2 do not need to be in this order. We can say premise 1, P. Premise 2, if P, then Q. Conclusion, Q. Let's have an example. I can say, you want to do well in school. Premise 2, if you want to do well in school, you should go to class. Conclusion, you should go to class. Let's have some fun. Let P represent the idea that Obama is Persian. Let Q represent the idea that there was a US president who was Persian. This is the content we're going to use to fill modus ponens. And when you do, if you do correctly, you will get this argument. The conclusion of this argument is that it is true that there was a Persian president in the United States. This is a valid argument because the conclusion would be true if the premises were true. It's not sound, but we don't care about soundness right now. A valid argument form is the cookie cutter that you can plug in any content or material into that cookie cutter and it will give you a cookie-shaped thing. For us, what was it? It was a circle. So if I put this over any material that's malleable, changeable, then we would end up with little tiny circles. Actually, not little tiny. Exactly this size and shape. Analogously, you can put any information you want into modus ponens, and so long as you keep that information consistent throughout your argument, you will have a valid argument. Now let's go in the reverse order. Let's take the logical argument form of modus ponens, and instead of stripping content, let's add content. So let's say what P represents, and let's say what Q represents. In this next example, allow P to represent that somebody cheated, and allow Q to represent that somebody failed. As you use the content to fill in the form, mind your P's and Q's. In other words, make sure that you remain consistent. And in doing so, you will get the following valid argument. If someone cheated, then they should fail. Premise 2, Sam is someone who cheated. Conclusion, Sam is someone who should fail.